Hello. So first of all, I would like to talk about few things that's very important to the camera. So number one is the aperture or the f-stop, something that you probably have heard before, and usually it is located on the lens. And the other thing is the shutter speed. So when we're talking about shutter speed, there are two types of shutter speed that you should know. One is focal plane type of shutter speed, and this is most of 35mm single lens reflex uses this. So it opens and closes like the blind. The other one is called the leaf type of shutter speed, and it works like the iris of the eye, and it is usually located on the lens as well. The large format camera uses this type of shutter speed, and also some medium format camera, they uses this type of shutter speed. So let me show you how or where the f-stop is. So f-stop is located on your lens. So here you can definitely adjust it. And I also have my digital camera here, and I use a film lens, and this is a 20mm. So you can see here the number 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, and 22. So if I dial this, then you probably started seeing there is something that opens and closes inside. Okay, so you can also see it from here. So by changing around the f-stop, this is also controlling the depth of field, with something that I have mentioned before. Depth of field is the area acceptable of sharpness. So this is the f-stop. And the next thing that I'm going to show is the shutter speed, which is on the totally manual film camera. It's located on the back, right here. And you're adjusting the shutter speed in here. So I'm going to press this, and you can start seeing. If I press that, then you started seeing that actually the shutter is open and closes. Okay, so those are the two things. So ideally, if you're shooting under a good lighting situation, and this is something that for all of you to start figuring things out, if you're shooting in a good lighting situation, if you have a bigger opening on your f-stop, that means you're going to let a lot of lights coming in, right? So that means you need to control the amount of shutter speed, the amount of lights by adjusting the shutter speed. And this is probably you may want to use a fast shutter speed. Does this make sense? I hope so. And if you're using a smaller opening on your f-stop, I'm just going to give you an example here. For example, f11, f16, f22. That's going to give you a smaller hole on the f-stop. So it allows you less light coming in. That means probably you may need to use a slower shutter speed. So everything between the f-stop and the shutter speed works together. And how do you know if you have enough amount of lights? Or now I'm going to talk about exposure is by looking through the viewfinder inside. Some cameras are different. They are on the bottom. Some cameras are on the side. Some camera goes like the needles that's going to the left and to the right. It tells you usually with plus and minus. Of course, plus means overexposed, minus means underexposed. Now, since we will be using DSLR for this class, another thing that you need to know is your ISO, or International Standard Organization. And on film camera, this is related to the film speed. So ISO, you can adjust it in here. And this is by pressing this. If you can see the numbers right now, it's 400. But if I dial this is going to change. Now I'm doing it at 100. Or if I switch this, I can make it to 3200, which is a very high speed. So this all relates to the amount of light. Two things actually. Your ISO relates to two things. Number one is the amount of light, or the sensitivity of lights. Like today is a great, bright, sunny day. So I could use ISO 200. but also it relates to the grain, especially on film. The lower the ISO, it's going to give you less grain. The higher the ISO, it's going to give you more grain. So I'm going to show you how to shoot minimum and maximum depth of field. So here I have Marine with her DSLR Nikon. So if you see the distance between me and her, we are not more than 8 feet away. So when you do this assignment, it should be between 6 to 8 feet away. You cannot be too close or you cannot be too far. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I'm going to ask Marine to set up the focal length at 50 millimeter. Great. Then afterwards, Marine, can you try to focus on my face? Did you get it? Great. So now adjust your f-stop accordingly. You can start by opening up your f-stop all the way. So you can use with any f-stop that you have in your camera. If you can open it to 2.8, go ahead and do it. Okay? So after you find the biggest f-stop, like for example, in this case it's using f4, and you need to try to find the correct exposure. So you need to adjust the shutter speed accordingly. And remember, when you're shooting with digital camera, ideally you should be shooting with slightly underexposed. Did you get the exposure? Great. Okay, now let's try to shoot it. Great. Okay, so that's with f4.5 with her camera. So now you don't want to change the focus. Okay, remember, you don't want to change the focal length. What you want to do is actually by just closing down the f-stop. Go ahead and close down the f-stop. What f-stop do you use, Marine?
F22.
Great. So she's using f22, and of course now that opening on the lens is closing very small. So that means her shutter speed will be slower. What is the shutter speed right now? 1/30th. So when you're using a slower shutter speed, you have to make sure that actually you are holding the camera very stable, because slight movement is just going to make everything out of focus. Now, we are not changing the distance. We are still about the same distance. The focus is still the same. The focal length is still the same. The difference is right now the f-stop and the shutter speed. Okay, now go ahead and shoot it. Now you guys can see the result on the before minimum and the maximum depth of field. So the focus is still the same, but if you pay attention to the background, it completely changes. Okay, so this is something that I would like you to do. Another assignment that you need to do is a blur shot. So this is a time when you want to use your shutter speed also slow, like for example 1/8, 1/15, or 1/30th is the fastest. Remember to always find what is the correct f-stop for that, okay? And I'm gonna use this book, a short course in digital photography, and then I'm gonna flip it like this, okay? And I'm gonna ask Marine later on to photograph me while I'm doing this. But remember, what's moving here? What's moving is the book. But I have to make sure that my body, my face stays still. So that's gonna be in sharp focus. And then the book is gonna show on the result that actually there is that blurred movement. Okay, so you're gonna see this video next. Okay, so the next one is a stop action. Now, when you're doing this assignment, you want to set up your shutter speed very high, very fast. Like for example, 1/250 or 1/500 or even faster than that. And of course, you have to adjust your aperture or f-stop accordingly. Find the right exposure and make sure what I would like to see from this assignment is that you are able to freeze the action. For example, later on I'm going to show you that I'm going to keep jumping and jumping and jumping. So those feet are going to be like frozen in the air. So Marina is going to photograph me while I'm walking down the steps, and of course she's going to count like 1, 2, 3 or 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to start moving that way. Okay, so that's something that I want you to do. So now you can see this example.
1.
So right now I'm going to show you how to do a pen shot, and trust me, pen shot is the most difficult technical assignment that you may have to do probably, because you're going to have, number one, to set up your shutter speed very slow. When I'm talking about slow shutter speed, like at least 1/8, 1/15, 1/30th is probably the fastest. And of course, you have to also adjust the f-stop or the aperture accordingly. So you need to find that on your exposure, okay? So I'm gonna give you an example because I'm gonna be moving and I'm gonna ask Marin to photograph me. Another thing that's very important to do a pen shot is you have to choose a background that has a texture, because that's gonna show that actually there will be some scratchy looking on the background. Okay, and make sure when you do this, you don't need to make the subject run around like super fast. Okay, so I'm gonna show you that actually I'm gonna move just one step, and then Marine is actually going to shoot it several times. And it helps if for this assignment, if you want to practice, just make sure that you use that counting like 1, 2, 3. So the subject is gonna move and the camera is gonna move parallel with the movement of the subject. Okay, so next you're gonna see this video.
2, 3. 1. Oh, not as good, but
You okay? Do it again.
3, 2, 1. Better. 1. And I can just simply be like, obviously this is the one I took.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
One more.
Yeah. 3, 2, 1.
And then I just...
Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Did it work?
Almost. Do it one more time.
All right.
3, 2, 1. it.